Elias stumbled through the chaotic throng of the Andari Expanse spaceport, his left boot catching on a grav luggage cart and sending him careening into a stack of hover crates. They wobbled precariously, humming in protest, and he yelped, arms flailing like a badly programmed android trying to dance. Somewhere above, a neon sign flickered, advertising intergalactic travel. 30% off your life choices, which he thought was the most accurate marketing he'd ever seen. He muttered to himself about how humans were supposed to be adaptable, yet here he was, face first in a pile of crates while alien shoppers glared at him like he'd just committed a galactic crime against etiquette. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement that didn't belong to the usual clutter of interstellar travelers. She stood tall, impossibly graceful even in the cramped corridor, her long ears arching slightly as if tuned to the spaceport's chaotic frequency. Her eyes flicked over the crowd with an intensity that suggested both elegance and a profound frustration with the universe. Elias blinked. She looked human, almost disturbingly so, except for the ears, which twitched in subtle rhythms as if she were reading electromagnetic signals through the air. He thought about making a joke, something about antennae being useful for intergalactic gossip, but wisely kept it to himself, fearing it might get him vaporized before lunch. The Dominion agents appeared like clockwork, striding through the throng with the precision of military drones. Their armor gleamed under the neon lights, and their faces were hidden behind visors that seemed designed to make them look terrifyingly patient. Elias swallowed, realizing he had stumbled directly into a situation that screamed bad idea in every possible language, from galactic basic to proto-Zarkan. He barely had time to think when the agents converged on the alien woman, who gave a resigned sigh that carried the weight of centuries. She muttered something under her breath in a language that made Elias think of jazz and static electricity simultaneously. "I think she's in trouble," he said aloud to no one in particular, waving his hands as if that would magically clarify the situation. The nearest agent turned his visor toward Elias with the kind of look that said, "Congratulations. You're now a target." Elias felt a cold sweat run down his spine and decided that maybe improvisation was his only option. He grabbed a loose grav crate lid like a shield, swung it with a surprising amount of force, and accidentally smacked the agent's comm panel. Sparks flew, alarms went off, and the entire spaceport seemed to go into panic mode. "Oops," Elias muttered, ducking behind a vending machine that sold liquid snacks in floating spheres. He peeked around the corner and saw the alien woman, Liara, he realized, taking advantage of the chaos to slip past the agents. Her movements were so fluid it made him feel like he was watching someone who had spent centuries practicing an elegant art form he had never even heard of. She glanced back once, long ears flicking in an almost human gesture of warning. Elias attempted to imitate her stealth, which resulted in a rather undignified slide across the polished floor and a comical bump into a hovering luggage drone. The drone beeped indignantly before zipping away, carrying his dignity with it. Liara finally reached a narrow corridor leading to the maintenance bay, and Elias scrambled after her, muttering, "I've got this," even though he had absolutely no idea what he had. He could hear the agents regrouping behind him, their footsteps echoing like drums of impending doom. He tripped over a cable, landed in a heap, and somehow managed to tangle himself in the maintenance bay's floating toolkit. Tools floated lazily around him in zero gravity, each one a potential lethal weapon if he didn't manage to free himself in time. He looked like a slapstick hologram of incompetence, but somehow it bought Liara a few crucial seconds. She glanced over her shoulder, her long ears twitching in irritation. "You're hopeless," she said, though there was a faint undertone of amusement. "Do humans always stumble through heroics like a newborn antelope?" "Only on Tuesdays," Elias replied, untangling himself from a levitating wrench with the finesse of someone who had absolutely no finesse. "Wednesdays are worse." The agents were closing in, their weapons humming with lethal intent. Elias spotted an emergency grav lift and made a snap decision. He shoved the last crate in the corridor, causing a domino effect that blocked the path with a precarious but effective barricade. "I call this modern art," he said, as the agents cursed in multiple languages and tried to maneuver around it. Liara used the moment to vault onto the lift platform, her movement so graceful it contrasted hilariously with Elia's panting, wobbling ascent. As the lift rose, they soared past the upper levels of the spaceport, floating gardens of bioluminescent algae glowing softly against the industrial metal walls. Liara's ears twitched again, catching subtle vibrations in the air. "Careful," she said, half serious, half teasing. "This section has unstable grav currents." "Noted," Elias said, juggling a toolkit to avoid breaking his fall again. "Do you always give instructions mid-chase, or is this special VIP treatment?" Liara gave him a look that was both stern and incredulous, which somehow made him grin. "You're impossible," she said. "I should have let destiny take its course." "Destiny's overrated," Elias replied, trying to sound profound while nearly impaling himself on a support beam. "I'm much better at improvisation and sarcasm." By the time they reached a service hatch leading to the docking bay, the spaceport was a scene of controlled chaos. Floating luggage, alarm lights, panicked travelers, and frustrated agents created a symphony of pandemonium that only Elias could have survived in one piece. Liara glanced at him, her long ears flicking in a rhythm that suggested something like approval. "You might just be the most infuriating human I've ever met," she admitted, "but also the most useful." Elias grinned, brushing a smear of grease from his sleeve. "I'll take useful over infuriating any day. Usually, on Tuesdays I prefer confusing." They slipped through the hatch, and for the first time, Elias noticed the stars beyond the docking bay, stretching infinitely in every direction. The galaxy, chaotic and enormous, suddenly felt like it had room for both of them. The stubborn human who refused to follow rules and the alien woman who had resigned herself to fate, until now. And as the hatch sealed behind them, Elias realized that escaping the spaceport was only the beginning. Whatever came next, it would be a mixture of chaos, humor, and improbable heroics, exactly the way he liked it. Elias floated awkwardly inside the cramped cockpit of the stolen starship. His legs tangled in the gravity restraints, and a panel of blinking lights threatening to electrocute him if he moved the wrong way. Liara, perched elegantly in the pilot's seat, leaned forward, her long ears twitching in perfect synchrony with the hum of the ship's engines. "You know," she said, her tone sharp but laced with amusement, "for someone so desperate to help, you're remarkably clumsy." "Clumsy is my superpower," Elias said, trying to lift himself without tripping over his own limbs. "It's like heroic acrobatics, but, with a 90% failure rate." Liara snorted, which might have been a laugh, though Elias wasn't entirely sure. The ship jerked violently as he accidentally bumped the warp navigation panel with his elbow. Sparks flew, and the semi-sentient AI that ran the ship beeped in protest. "Really human," it said in a dry, monotone voice. "I have experienced countless pilots over centuries. None have managed to combine incompetence with sheer audacity quite like this." "Hey," Elias protested, waving a hand toward the AI. "I'm improvising." Liara rolled her eyes. Improvising usually doesn't involve almost detonating the ship on takeoff. Despite the chaos, they launched into hyperspace, and Elias, clinging to a console with both hands, realized the galaxy was not going to be subtle about showing its dangers. Wormholes stretched before them like glowing ribbons, unpredictable and jittering with erratic energy bursts. Liara's ears twitched again, detecting the subtle warps in space-time that even the AI struggled to predict. "We need to navigate carefully," she said. "One misstep and we end up in a supernova, or worse, a bureaucracy-heavy star system. And trust me, those are worse than death." Elias grinned, even as his stomach flipped. "I like a challenge. Plus, I'm pretty sure supernova avoidance is in my job description somewhere, probably. They passed through the first wormhole, with little more than a jolt, and a few panicked yelps from Elias. He had a brief vision of himself as a heroic spacefarer, which quickly dissolved when his foot hit a floating toolbox, sending wrenches and spanners into zero-gravity chaos. Liara calmly used her long ears to sense the electromagnetic currents in the tools, guiding them back into place with precision. "You really have a talent for turning minor tasks into disaster theater," she said. "And you," Elias shot back, "have a talent for making me feel like I'm both a hero and a disaster at the same time. Very inspiring." Liara gave a sigh which might have been approval. "You are infuriating," she admitted, "and yet not entirely useless." Hours, or what felt like hours to Elias, who had lost all sense of normal time in hyperspace, passed in a rhythm of quips, near catastrophes, and the occasional alien expletive that made him laugh inappropriately. He learned that her long ears were more than aesthetic. They functioned like an intricate sensory array, allowing her to perceive disturbances in the warp currents and subtle shifts in the gravitational tides. When he accidentally tried to pull a lever that would have reversed the ship's polarity, she grabbed his arm with a grip firm enough to make him yelp, ears twitching slightly in frustration. "Human, I swear," she muttered. "Relax," he said, rubbing his arm. "I was just testing the ship's response. Scientific method." Liara raised an eyebrow. Scientific method, more like reckless idiocy. Their bickering was interrupted by a sudden alert. Dominion drones had tracked them into the hyperspace corridor. Small, insect-like ships swarmed toward them, weapons charging with predatory precision. Elias clutched the console. "Well, this is awkward." "Awkward," Liara echoed. "This is extremely life-threatening." Elias grinned despite the tension. "Extreme life-threatening is my specialty." Liara's ears twitched, sensing a subtle anomaly in the drone's formation. "Follow my lead," she instructed, initiating a maneuver that bent space-time around the starship in a way that made even the AI hesitate. The ship twisted and shuddered, narrowly dodging a swarm of energy blasts. Elias held on for dear life, muttering something about regretting breakfast, lunch, and possibly his entire life. Amid the chaos, he noticed that Liara's eyes glimmered with a mixture of focus and amusement. She was terrifyingly competent, but there was an undercurrent of humor in the way she managed the ship. "You're terrifyingly reckless," she said, her voice steady even as lasers cut close. "You're terrifyingly patient," he shot back. "Also, terrifyingly good at terrifying me." They emerged from the final wormhole battered, but intact, only to find themselves near a pulsar field, the radiation forming a deadly obstacle course of glowing plasma arcs. Liara's ears picked up subtle variations in the radiation currents, allowing them to weave through the pulsar's dangerous paths. Elias attempted to help by moving switches and pressing buttons, which caused a minor explosion in the navigation console. Sparks rained down in slow motion, eliciting a loud groan from the AI. "Human," it said flatly, "I do not understand your methods, but they are effective in a masochistic sort of way." "Thank you," Elias offered, unsure whether he should take that as praise. Liara managed a half-smile. "You're like a cat in zero gravity," she muttered. "Annoying, unpredictable, and somehow surviving against all odds." Finally, after what seemed like a combination of skill, luck, and sheer stubbornness, they cleared the pulsar field. Elias collapsed onto a nearby console, panting and grinning like a man who had survived being inside a blender. Liara, seated elegantly in the pilot chair, gave a small, approving nod, her long ears flicking with subtle amusement. "You know," Elias said between gasps, "I'm beginning to think space travel is 90% panic, 10% luck, and maybe 1% competence." Liara tilted her head. "And yet here we are, alive." "Yes," Elias said, looking out the viewport at the endless galaxy, stars twinkling like mischievous spectators. "Alive. And apparently responsible for rewriting the definition of reckless heroics." Liara's ears twitched again, a small but unmistakable gesture of approval. "Don't let this go to your head," she warned. "Tomorrow we may die spectacularly." Elias laughed, tossing a floating wrench in the air and catching it awkwardly. "Then tomorrow I shall do so spectacularly with style and humor, preferably more humor than style, though. I'm better at comedy." As the starship drifted into the depths of the galaxy, Elias and Liara shared a moment of quiet triumph. They were fugitives, outlaws, and perhaps the most improbable duo in the expanse of space. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and chaotic, but for the first time, both felt that chaos might just be navigable with a little humor, a lot of stubbornness, and an alien woman who refused to let destiny dictate her life. The asteroid colony floated like a glittering jewel in the void, hollowed out from a rock so large it could have been mistaken for a small planet. Elias stumbled out of the starship, legs still wobbling from zero-gravity jitters, and tripped over a floating garden planter. Liara's long ears twitched sharply as she steadied him with an amused glare. "You do realize we're supposed to be subtle, right?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. Elias waved a hand vaguely. "Subtle is my middle name." "Actually, no, my middle name is Gary. Subtle is definitely my cousin." The colony's inhabitants, aliens of every imaginable shape, paused to watch them land, curious and wary. Some had translucent skin. Others had multiple eyes orbiting their heads in geometric perfection. They murmured to one another, clearly debating whether Elias was harmlessly foolish or dangerously unpredictable. Liara ignored the murmuring, scanning the crowd with the precision only her long ears could afford. Elias followed her gaze and muttered, "Are you always this intimidating?" "Only when I need to be," she replied, "which is often, especially around humans like you." They navigated the winding corridors, which twisted unpredictably in ways that made gravity a suggestion rather than a rule. Elias tripped again, smacking a floating lever that activated a holographic welcome sign. "Welcome, guests of destiny," it bellowed. Elias ducked as sparks shot from the panel. "I don't think destiny likes me," he muttered. Liara's ears flicked, catching subtle vibrations in the colony's energy field. The Dominion agents were tracking them, of course. They always tracked. But the colony's advanced technology and anarchic layout provided a perfect cover. Elias tried to help by pressing buttons on a nearby console, only to accidentally open a hatch that sent a maintenance droid tumbling through the air, spinning like a confused top. Liara sighed. "I should really be worried," she muttered, "but you somehow make disaster entertaining." They reached the central plaza, a vast open space with floating gardens, artificial rivers, and gravity wells designed for both transport and amusement. Here, Liara faced the inevitable choice. A holographic transmission flickered in front of her, the Council of Elders, the architects of her destiny, demanding her return and obedience. She stiffened, her long ears bristling with tension. Elias stood beside her, brushing dust off his jacket with exaggerated nonchalance. "Not today," he said firmly, and a small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Liara blinked. The word struck her not as rebellion, but as a lifeline. She had spent her life molded by rules, tradition, and expectation, and yet here was a human, ridiculous, flawed, and unqualified, refusing to let her surrender to any of it. She began, uncertain. "I said it, I mean it. Besides, if destiny wants us to fail, we can at least fail spectacularly," Elias replied, shrugging and gesturing at the colony's bizarre architecture. "And with flair." Her ears twitched in amusement. "Spectacularly, yes. Flair I can accept." With a shared glance, they sprang into action. Using the colony's floating platforms and gravity wells, they created a chaotic obstacle course that outwitted the approaching Dominion agents. Elias improvised at every turn, tripping alarms, sending droids careening into one another, and generally demonstrating a level of incompetence that somehow became a tactical advantage. Liara followed, her long ears sensing subtle fluctuations in energy fields and enemy positioning, guiding their improbable route. The final confrontation occurred in the energy core chamber, where the Dominion agents attempted a direct assault. Elias grabbed a random console, pulled a lever at random, and activated the chamber's containment fields, which wrapped around the agents harmlessly but thoroughly immobilized them. "See," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Heroic improvisation works every time." Liara stepped forward, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I am no one's pawn," she declared, her ears quivering with authority. "I choose my own path here and now. My fate is mine." The agents sputtered in frustration, their programming unable to comprehend disobedience backed by both cunning and absurdity. Elias gave a small bow. "And apparently a ridiculous human companion," he added. Liara's gaze softened. "You are insufferable," she admitted, but the faint curve of her lips betrayed a smile. "Yet I am grateful." Hours later, the dust settled. The Dominion agents deactivated and retreating, and the colony's inhabitants cautiously returned to their routines. Elias and Liara stood on a floating balcony, staring out into the glittering void of space. Stars stretched infinitely, indifferent to their struggles, yet somehow the galaxy seemed a little friendlier. Elias scratched the back of his neck. "You know, I think I've grown," he said. "Not sure how, but apparently surviving near-death experiences and alien scolding builds character. Or at least makes you better at tripping into heroics." Liara chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly musical. "You have changed too," she said. "You've learned that courage can be messy, human, but also contagious. I may have thought myself alone against fate, but I am not. Not anymore." He grinned. "See, all part of the cosmic comedy. You face destiny, I face gravity, and somehow we both survive. It's teamwork if you squint." Her long ears flicked with amusement. "Perhaps I will learn to squint." They floated in silence for a while, two improbable allies in a galaxy that insisted on being unpredictable, chaotic, and beautiful. The bond they had forged was more than survival. It was defiance, trust, and humor stitched into the fabric of fate itself. Elias realized he had grown, not just in courage, but in understanding the value of connection, of refusing to bow to rules blindly, and of finding joy even in the most dangerous of circumstances. Liara, once resigned to a life mapped by others, now embraced the uncertainty of her own choices. Together, they would navigate the vastness of space, bound not by destiny but by the defiant will to choose, to laugh, and to live. And as the colony's lights glimmered behind them, Elias floated a little higher, grinning like a man who had just rewritten the definition of what it meant to be a hero, while Liara's ears twitched in the silent acknowledgement that sometimes the most powerful act in the galaxy is saying, "Not today."